The marble floors gleamed under the harsh white lights, each step echoing like a warning. In the heart of the Jackson County Courthouse, everything was designed to make you feel small. The walls towered, cold and indifferent, while behind the judge's bench, an enormous American flag hung, watchful, unmoving. The smell of cheap coffee, musty paper, and fresh wax floated through the air. It was just another Tuesday, or so it seemed. A crowd gathered, restless and impatient. Some watched the clock, others checked their phones. Only one person stood out in the benches, a black woman in a navy blue dress, her posture perfectly straight, hands clasped tightly around a worn leather satchel. She looked like she could be anyone. A teacher, a nurse, maybe an accountant. No one gave her a second glance, except the bailiff. He glared as she stepped up to the defendant's table, his lips tightening with each click of her heels. The courtroom was a machine, and he knew every moving part. Outsiders were obvious, especially women like her. The ones who didn't dress down, didn't bow their heads. He cleared his throat. "You here for a hearing, ma'am?" She nodded, her voice calm. "Yes, sir." He squinted, looking for a hint of trouble. "Name?" "Imani Brooks." He scribbled it on a yellow legal pad and grunted, "Sit tight. The judge will be in soon. No cell phones, and don't talk to anybody." Imani slid onto the hard wooden bench, steady and composed. Her eyes flicked over the room. A tired public defender prepping papers, a prosecutor in a pinstripe suit typing furiously, a row of white faces, some bored, some openly judgmental. At the front, an older white man in robes shuffled his notes. Judge Leonard Price, a name everyone knew, notorious for his temper, legendary for his no-nonsense courtroom. He prided himself on treating everyone the same, but his gaze lingered longest on those who didn't look like him. Price rapped his gavel, silencing the crowd. Court is now in session. The air changed. He scanned the docket. First case, Imani Brooks, child support review. A titter swept the benches. People knew that name, or thought they did. Imani stayed still, head high. "Step forward, Ms. Brooks," Price commanded. She rose, walking with the grace of someone used to eyes on her. Not that anyone noticed. Their focus was on the fact that she was alone. No attorney, no one at her side. Price looked her up and down, his lips curling into a thin, sour line. "You're here about your support modification?" Imani nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." He leaned back in his chair, skeptical. "You filed these papers yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor." "I did." A smirk flickered across the prosecutor's face. The bailiff rolled his eyes. Price shuffled the papers, unimpressed. "Says here you're recently employed." "Where?" Imani spoke, her voice unwavering. "In public service." Price raised an eyebrow. "What? City Hall? Sanitation?" A ripple of laughter. She met his stare, unflinching. "No, sir, a new appointment." Price frowned, uninterested. "Doesn't matter. Here's what I see. A woman coming in, asking for special treatment. No lawyer, thinking she's above the rules." Imani's jaw tensed. "I'm not asking for special treatment, sir. Just what the law provides." Price scoffed. "You people always have an excuse." The words hung in the air, sharp, poisonous. The room stilled. Imani's face didn't change. She'd heard worse. Price pressed on. "Well, let's see how special you really are. I don't care who you think you are, Ms. Brooks. In my courtroom, you're just another single mother who can't get her life together." A hush. The public defender looked up, startled. The prosecutor grinned. The bailiff's hand rested on his baton, just in case. Imani didn't blink. "With respect, Your Honor, I'm here because I care for my child. I'm asking for a fair review, nothing more." Price shook his head, his voice rising. "Spare me the speeches. I see your type every day, always playing the victim, always expecting a handout. He turned to the clerk. "Pull her records. Let's see just how responsible Ms. Brooks really is." The clerk, a young white woman, nervous and eager to please, scurried to her computer. Imani stood in silence, every muscle taut. People whispered, someone snapped a photo, somewhere a social media feed buzzed. No one knew they were witnessing the beginning of a story that would shake the state to its core. The minutes dragged on, each one stretched by the hum of whispered judgments and the click of courtroom keyboards. Judge Price flipped through the papers as if searching for a reason to deny her, eyes flicking up every so often with naked suspicion. The clerk hesitated, scanning the records on her monitor. Your Honor," she began, "there's something unusual in the employment file." Price cut her off. "Save it. I'll get to it when I'm ready." He looked back at Imani, letting the silence swell and sting. "Ms. Brooks, where is the child's father today?" Imani kept her tone steady. "He was notified, Your Honor. He chose not to appear." Price snorted, scribbling something on his pad. Typical. The prosecutor, a tall, pale man with sharp cheekbones and a clipped voice, leaned forward. "Your Honor, Miss Brooks's request is not only unsupported, it's audacious. She wants to reduce her payments while claiming she's now employed, but she refuses to disclose her full income." A few heads nodded in the gallery. This was a show, and the crowd loved a villain. Imani didn't budge. "I've submitted every required document. My earnings are public record." Price rolled his eyes. "So you say. Yet you're here asking for leniency? If you have nothing to hide, why not bring a lawyer?" "I'm capable of representing myself," Imani replied, her voice level but edged with steel. The prosecutor sneered. "Capable or just arrogant?" Price tapped his gavel. "Order. Ms. Brooks, let's get one thing clear. Your attitude won't win you any favors in this courtroom." From the back, someone snickered. Another snapped a photo on their phone. The energy in the room was shifting. Electric, predatory. Imani stood her ground. She was used to this, people assuming, doubting, dismissing. Every inch of her life had been a fight against lower expectations. She had survived far worse than Judge Price. He began reading aloud from her file, his voice oily and dismissive. "Mother of one, single previous address in Westfield Heights, now moved to a private rental. No criminal record, no priors, no obvious reason to need special help. And yet, here we are." He peered at her over the rim of his glasses, his tone tightening. "Do you enjoy wasting the court's time?" Imani's lips pressed together. "I enjoy seeing justice done, Your Honor." The bailiff shifted in his seat, bracing for trouble. Price snapped, "That's for me to decide, not you. Around here, we do things by the book. Maybe you're used to getting your way somewhere else, but not here." He leaned forward, voice dropping to a sneer. "So tell me again, what is this new job you keep mentioning? Maybe it's time you spell it out, since you seem so proud." Imani paused, considering, her gaze sweeping over the faces turned toward her. Some were bored, some openly hostile, but a very few, looked curious. She spoke quietly. "I've recently accepted a state appointment." Price barked a laugh. "Oh, a state job. What, crossing guards? File clerk? Social services?" Someone in the gallery muttered, "Probably a diversity hire." More laughter. Imani met Price's stare, her voice a hair above a whisper but perfectly clear. "It's a leadership role, one that serves every resident of this state." He cut her off, rolling his eyes. "Everyone in here's a leader, Ms. Brooks, or so they say. Unless you're about to tell me you're the mayor herself, save the tall tales." Imani didn't respond. She didn't have to. The tension was thick now, each second stretching tight as piano wire. The clerk piped up again, her voice shaky. "Your Honor, I think you should see this." But Price waved her off. Sit down, Ms. Jennings. I'll look at the file when I'm good and ready. The prosecutor pressed on, voice oily. I move that the court deny her request outright, Your Honor. She's withholding information, grandstanding, and clearly not interested in cooperating. Price nodded, gavel at the ready. I'm inclined to agree. Ms. Brooks, any last words before I make my ruling? Imani drew a deep breath. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on the floor. The smell of old coffee and disinfectant seemed to grow sharper, stinging her nostrils. She could hear her own heartbeat, steady but strong. She glanced at the clerk, then back at Price. Your Honor, I have nothing to hide, but I do have a right to fair treatment, regardless of your personal opinion. A hush fell over the room. Price's face turned a shade darker. He was about to speak when the doors at the rear of the courtroom banged open. Two men in crisp suits entered, moving with purpose. The younger one, black, with a close-cropped fade and wire-rimmed glasses, strode straight to the bench and handed a folder to the bailiff. The older man, a white man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the bearing of someone used to being obeyed, addressed Price, his voice cool but commanding. Your Honor, I'm afraid there's been a grave misunderstanding. The entire courtroom turned. Price bristled. And you are? The man smiled thinly. My name is Thomas Ellison. I'm the State Director of Public Affairs. This is Deputy Chief of Staff, Mr. Carter. We're here on behalf of the Governor's office. A ripple ran through the room. The bailiff's jaw dropped. Ellison fixed Price with a steely look. We're here for Ms. Brooks. The prosecutor paled, his bravado crumbling. The gallery fell silent, all eyes on Imani. She stood taller, the corners of her mouth set. Her secret was about to become history. Judge Price stiffened behind the bench, his face draining of color as Thomas Ellison's words echoed through the silent room. No one moved. Even the ancient clock above the seal of the state seemed to pause, its second hand frozen in mid-tick. The bailiff swallowed hard, shifting from foot to foot. The gallery leaned in, the air thick with confusion and disbelief. This was not how these hearings went. Not in Jackson County, not in Price's courtroom. Ellison nodded at Imani, his expression unreadable. Governor Brooks, I apologize for the interruption, but given the circumstances, we thought it best to intervene personally. The room collectively exhaled, a sound of astonishment and sudden clarity. People glanced at each other, eyes wide. The name Brooks was everywhere on campaign signs, op-eds, and news tickers, but almost no one had seen the governor's face. She'd only been sworn in 2 weeks before, and the media had been tightly managed, photographs rare and official. Rumor was she wanted to walk the streets like everyone else. No motorcades, no pomp. Now, in a stark, wood-paneled courtroom, the truth was impossible to miss. Judge Price found his voice hoarse and brittle. Governor. Imani turned, her chin lifted with quiet authority. Yes, Your Honor, I am Imani Brooks, duly elected governor of this state. She looked him square in the eye. And today, I stand here not as an official, but as a mother, a citizen seeking fair treatment under the law. The impact hit like a shockwave. The prosecutor slid his chair back, face chalky. The clerk's hands trembled over her keyboard. A reporter in the back, finally recognizing the governor, fumbled for his phone, thumbs flying over a breaking news alert. Ellison addressed the court again, his voice measured. It appears there's been a gross violation of protocol and decorum. The governor came to this court in good faith, expecting equal treatment. Instead, she was mocked, dismissed, and subjected to language unbecoming of any officer of this court. Price sputtered, clutching at his gavel. This is highly irregular. No one told me. Perhaps you should have asked, Ellison replied, his tone sharp as glass. Instead, you assumed, you belittled, and you allowed this entire room to participate in that disrespect." A murmur rippled through the audience, some faces burning with embarrassment, others masked in shocked admiration. Imani didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. "Your Honor, I did not seek special treatment. I asked only for justice. If you treat me this way in front of witnesses, how do you treat those with no voice at all?" The question landed with deadly precision. For a moment, Judge Price looked smaller than his chair. The power he wielded now a weight he could barely hold. The younger aide, Mr. Carter, spoke next, his words crisp. "This hearing is now a matter of public record. The governor's legal team will be reviewing all transcripts and recordings. Any further proceedings today will be observed by representatives of the State Ethics Commission." The prosecutor stammered, desperate to salvage dignity. "Your Honor, I had no idea." Ellison fixed him with a glare. "You had every opportunity to treat a petitioner with respect. Instead, you choose contempt. Let this be a lesson." Judge Price's hand trembled on the bench. He cleared his throat, voice thin and uneven. "Ms. Governor Brooks, I apologize. Had I known—" Imani's eyes narrowed, calm but unyielding. "Would you have treated me differently if you had known?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Ellison took the moment to address the room. "Let it be known. Justice is not blind if it only recognizes power. The people of this state deserve better." A security guard appeared at the side door, phone pressed to his ear. He whispered something to the clerk, who paled and nodded. The news was spreading. By now, the whole courthouse was buzzing. Imani gathered her papers, her composure never wavering. She turned once more to Judge Price. "Your Honor, I trust you'll recuse yourself from this matter. My team will be submitting a formal complaint. The law is meant to protect, not to humiliate." With that, she stepped away from the table, the crowd parting before her like a tide. She paused, glanced at the young clerk, the only one in the room who'd tried to speak up, and nodded with the smallest flicker of gratitude. Ellison and Carter flanked her as they moved toward the exit, but not before every camera in the room captured the sight of a woman walking out, not just as a petitioner but as a leader who had revealed the rotten heart of the system on its own turf. In the hush that followed, the only sound was Judge Price's pen clattering on the desk. Outside, the hallway was already alave with chaos. Journalists shouting questions, courthouse staff staring in disbelief, phones lighting up with headlines, "Governor Brooks humiliated in courtroom bias showdown." But Imani kept moving, each step echoing with the knowledge that this was only the beginning. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with summer heat and static. Reporters pressed against barricades, their cameras and microphones jostling for a glimpse of the woman who had just turned the justice system upside down. Flashbulbs flickered like a swarm of fireflies, painting Imani's features in sharp relief as she emerged from the courthouse steps. "Governor Brooks, did the judge know who you were? Were you treated differently because of your race? Do you plan to take action against the court?" Questions flew like arrows, fast and unforgiving. Imani paused for a split second at the top of the stairs, her chin lifted, face impassive. Ellison and Carter stepped forward, creating a protective barrier between her and the hungry press. She spoke, her voice clear and unwavering, carrying over the din. "I came here today as a citizen, a mother and a leader who believes in the law. What happened inside is not unique to me. It's the reality faced by too many across our state and country. Justice does not recognize titles, nor should it need to, but respect must be earned and given equally." She did not wait for the next volley of questions. She moved down the steps, each stride measured, her composure unbreakable. The reporters trailed after her, shouting, desperate for more. A few bystanders, stunned into silence, began to clap. The applause started as a trickle, then spread along the sidewalk until the sound became a wave that rippled down the block. By the time Imani reached the car waiting at the curb, her name was already trending in half a dozen states. Social media exploded with hashtags: number Governor Brooks, number Justice Served, number Courthouse Bias. Clips of Judge Price's arrogance and Imani's poised responses were cut and posted, looping endlessly on every timeline. In a nearby coffee shop, a barista watched the coverage in disbelief. "That's the new governor? I didn't even know she was from here." An older woman shook her head. "Doesn't matter where she's from. They treated her like she was nothing just because, well, you know." The man in the next booth frowned at his phone. "That judge is finished. No way he survives this." Inside the governor's vehicle, Ellison fielded urgent calls as Carter scrolled through statements from allies, critics, and civil rights groups. "We're getting requests for interviews from every network, Governor. You want to speak to the national morning shows." Imani shook her head. "Not yet. This isn't about me. It's about what happens next." The car wound through downtown, passing murals and boarded-up storefronts, churches, and beauty salons. The city was alive with rumor and disbelief. Back at the state capitol, staffers crowded around TVs in break rooms and conference halls. Her chief of staff, Vanessa Goodwin, a sharp-tongued strategist from Atlanta, was already organizing a crisis team. "Here's what we do," Vanessa said, voice brisk over speakerphone. "We demand a formal review of Judge Price's conduct. We call for a statewide audit of courtroom practices. And we set up a hotline for people to report discrimination in the courts." Ellison nodded. "Already drafting the press release. The Ethics Commission is on alert. Local activists are planning a rally tonight." In her private office, Imani finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She stared out the window, watching clouds gather over the city. For a fleeting second, she saw herself as a child, waiting in similar halls, clutching her mother's hand, ignored and overlooked. Not anymore. Her phone buzzed, a message from her daughter's school. "Saw you on TV, Mama. I'm so proud." Imani smiled, the fatigue falling away, if only for a moment. By midday, the story had made every news network from coast to coast. Civil rights attorneys gave interviews and former defendants spoke out on talk radio. A black pastor in a small town 200 miles away delivered a sermon on justice and dignity, quoting Imani's words from the courthouse steps. At a public housing office, a young woman in a faded sundress approached the counter with new confidence. "If the governor can stand up to them, so can I." Meanwhile, Judge Price's office was under siege. Protesters gathered outside his home and courtroom, demanding his resignation. Journalists dug into his history, old complaints, questionable rulings, and letters sent to the editor by former defendants. Anonymous tips flooded the courthouse hotline. The district attorney announced a review of all cases presided over by Judge Price in the last 10 years. Inside his chambers, Price sat at his desk, phone silent for the first time in memory. His hands shook as he scrawled his resignation letter, the words blurring through tears of rage and humiliation. That evening, as the sun dipped low in gold across the skyline, a crowd gathered on the Capitol steps. Hundreds swelled into thousands, students, teachers, nurses, grandmothers in Sunday hats, lawyers and janitors, and kids with homemade signs. Imani walked out onto the steps to face them, the plaza awash in cell phone lights and cheers. She raised her hand for silence. "I am not special. I am not immune to injustice. No one is. But today we saw the power of truth. We saw what happens when the system is forced to look at itself in the mirror. Let this be a turning point, not just for me, but for every person who's ever felt invisible in the halls of justice. Her voice rang out, strong and clear. We will build a court system worthy of this state's promise. I pledge that to you tonight, and I promise this is just the beginning. The crowd roared. Chants of "Brooks, Brooks" echoed down the avenues. Somewhere, a group started singing the anthem, voices lifting above the city as if to cleanse it. In newsrooms across the country, editors scrambled to write headlines. Governor exposes courtroom bias, state responds. New leader, new era. Brooks calls for systemic change. Single mom, now governor, turns system on its head. Back in her office, Imani sat alone at her desk. Outside, the celebrations continued, but she knew the real work was only just beginning. She opened her daughter's text one more time and typed back, "Thank you, baby. Today was for you." She looked at her own reflection in the office window, no longer invisible, no longer underestimated. She was seen, she was heard, and tomorrow she will begin again. The next morning, dawn broke over the state capitol with a restless energy. Newspapers landed on doorsteps with bold headlines and full-page photos of Imani. Her face, once unfamiliar, now instantly recognizable across the country. She had become a symbol overnight, her name synonymous with courage and confrontation. Inside the governor's mansion, staff phones buzzed non-stop. Vanessa Goodwin sipped her coffee, scanning a spreadsheet filled with names. Judges, prosecutors, clerks, and court officials statewide. She circled the worst offenders in red. "Damage control isn't enough," she muttered, dialing a number. "We need real reform. Imani can't just be the face of this, she has to be the architect." In a conference room down the hall, Ellison met with a group of state senators, their faces tight with concern. Some had supported Imani's candidacy. Others had opposed her. Sure, she'd be soft on tradition. Now none could deny her power. "We're getting calls from donors and district leaders," Senator Branson said, eyes darting. "What's the plan, Tom?" Ellison answered without hesitation. "We launch a statewide review of judicial conduct, create an independent oversight board, and push for mandatory anti-bias training. This can't be a press release. It has to be policy." One senator frowned. "That'll upset the old guard?" Ellison nodded. "Maybe it should." The group fell silent, the weight of history pressing on their shoulders. In a federal office in Washington, D.C., Attorney General Linda Daniels sat at her desk, reviewing the viral footage. Her advisors hovered, whispering about the public outcry and the unprecedented wave of complaints flooding civil rights hotlines. Daniels pursed her lips. "Draft a letter of commendation for Governor Brooks and get the Office for Civil Rights on the phone. This is the moment we've been waiting for." A young staffer leaned in. "Ma'am, do you want to go public with support?" Daniels nodded. "Yes, it's time for the feds to step in. We'll use this to audit discriminatory court practices in every state." Across the country, courthouse doors trembled. Judges who had once ruled with unchecked authority now scrolled nervously through their emails, fearing their careers might end as quickly as prices. Meanwhile, Imani gathered her closest advisors in her private study. The mood was tense but hopeful. Vanessa, Ellison, Carter, and a few trusted friends sat in a circle, their laptops open, fingers flying across keyboards. Imani sat at the head of the table, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. "Let's be honest," she began. "This isn't just about one judge. It's about an entire culture, one that punishes women who speak up, that mocks anyone it sees as other. I want real accountability, not just apologies, not just resignations." Carter nodded. "We're with you, Governor. We've already heard from dozens of people, Black, Latino, single parents, immigrants, sharing their stories. This is bigger than us." Vanessa scrolled through her phone, reading messages aloud. Listen to this. My son was suspended without cause, but after seeing you, I called the school board. Thank you for showing us we don't have to stay quiet. She looked up, eyes bright. You're a movement now, Imani. Imani's expression softened. Movements need more than inspiration. They need follow-through. Carter, draft a memo to every department. Zero tolerance for bias, mandatory reporting of complaints, and a review of all outstanding cases from Judge Price's tenure. Carter nodded, fingers flying. Vanessa added, you need to do a town hall, not just here, but in every major city. Let people see you, talk to you, and ask questions. Make them feel heard. Imani smiled. Schedule the first for tomorrow night. No script, just the truth. Not everyone was ready to accept change. In a private club on the edge of town, a group of retired judges gathered over cigars and brandy. Their voices were low, but the bitterness was clear. Did you see the news? One growled. She embarrassed all of us, like we're a pack of racists. Another snorted. Well, maybe some folks needed embarrassing. A third, older judge shook his head, resigned. Times are changing, gentlemen. Either you learn or you get left behind. They drank in silence, the echoes of their fading era ringing in the heavy air. Late that evening, Imani returned home. Her daughter, little Brielle, ran into her arms, eyes shining with pride. The kitchen was filled with the scent of cinnamon rolls, her mother's way of celebrating small victories. Brielle tugged at her sleeve. Mama, can I go to the next rally with you? Imani knelt, smoothing her daughter's hair. You can do anything you want, baby. You can stand up for what's right, just like today. Her mother, Miss Laverne, watched from the doorway, a gentle smile on her lips. Don't forget to rest, child. Tomorrow, the work begins again. Imani nodded, allowing herself a rare moment of peace. Surrounded by the women who had shaped her, her mother, her daughter, she felt the depth of the movement she was building. This was bigger than any single act of defiance. She looked out the window at the city lights, her heart full but determined. The following morning, news broke of 2 more judges stepping down after investigations revealed patterns of bias and misconduct. Civil rights groups called for sweeping reforms, while law schools announced new scholarship programs for students of color. Activists launched a hotline for citizens to report mistreatment in the courts. Within hours, hundreds of calls flooded in. Imani's office was inundated with invitations to speak, lead panels, and consult on judicial reform. For the first time in decades, real accountability seemed possible. And yet, behind the hope, there was backlash. Anonymous threats filled Imani's inbox. Old enemies whispered about conspiracies, about power plays, about knowing her place. But the tide had turned. The eyes of the country were on her, and she refused to back down. Imani met each challenge head-on, her resolve growing with every step. The night of the first town hall, 1,000 people packed into a high school gymnasium. Folding chairs filled the floor, while news crews crowded the back, their red lights blinking. Imani walked onto the stage alone. No handlers, no speechwriters. She wore a simple navy blazer, her hair pulled back, her eyes clear. She greeted the crowd, her voice strong. I stand before you today not just as your governor, but as a woman who knows what it means to fight for justice. This is our moment to set things right. I want to hear from you. I want to know what justice means in your lives. Hands shot up. One by one, people spoke about eviction, about unfair traffic stops, about teachers who gave up on them, about hope and about fear. Imani listened to every word, her responses thoughtful, honest, sometimes blunt. At the end, a little boy approached the microphone, his hands trembling. Will it ever get better, Governor? Imani knelt to his level. her voice warm but fierce. It will, if we work for it, if we demand it, if we don't give up. The crowd rose in applause, the sound rolling through the gym like thunder. For the first time in years, the people believed change was not only possible, but inevitable. Within 48 hours, Imani Brooks was everywhere. Cable news, late-night talk shows, the front page of the New York Times. Headlines screamed her name. Every major network replayed the now famous footage of Judge Price's humiliation and Imani's calm, defiant response. Social media was ablaze. Governor Brooks doesn't just talk about justice, she lives it. This is the kind of leadership America needs. Brooks for president trended by sunrise. Yet as the story rocketed through the country, the spotlight grew sharper and more dangerous. In Washington, senior advisors crowded around a conference table, the room thick with the tension of 1,000 power struggles. The president, eyes fixed on the glowing screen, watched as reporters grilled Imani on live TV. One advisor leaned in. "She's electrified the country, sir. Even the opposition is treading lightly." The president set down his coffee. "Get her on the phone. We need her at the National Governors Conference next week. Give her a speaking slot." Another advisor, wary, asked, "Aren't we worried about backlash?" "She's upending the old boys club," the president smiled. "Maybe it's about time." Back in her state, Imani's days blurred into a marathon of meetings, interviews, and security briefings. Her office was flooded with letters, some grateful, some hateful, a few chilling. One envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a single sheet, scrawled in shaky block letters. "Go back to where you came from." "You will never belong." Vanessa read it, jaw tight. "We need to increase your security, Imani. The State Patrol wants you under 24-hour protection." Imani shook her head. "I won't hide. Not now." But Ellison insisted, "You're a symbol, Governor." That makes you a target. For every threat, there were a dozen outpourings of hope. An elderly woman from rural Mississippi mailed a homemade quilt and a note. "I watched you on TV with my grandkids. You made us proud. Don't let them scare you." A group of high schoolers from Detroit sent a video of themselves holding signs. "Thank you for standing up for us. You give us hope." Imani played the video twice, eyes shining. Meanwhile, the backlash began to organize. Conservative commentators blasted Imani nightly, accusing her of race-baiting, grandstanding, and trying to tear down American traditions. Editorials demanded she respect the authority of the courts and remember her place. In private chat rooms and closed-door fundraisers, powerful men schemed to destroy her. A coalition of state legislators threatened to introduce a bill stripping the governor's office of certain powers. Old friends stopped returning calls. Former allies whispered betrayal. But Imani refused to flinch. Vanessa and Carter worked double shifts, preparing responses, organizing allies, and reaching out to faith leaders, unions, teachers, and business owners. Imani called for an emergency summit with other governors, insisting on judicial reform as a priority. "This is our moment," she told them. "If we don't seize it, we'll lose it for another generation." Some resisted, but many, especially women, especially people of color, stood with her. They shared their own stories of being dismissed, overlooked, or outright threatened by the system. Through it all, Imani clung to her family like a life raft. Brielle was her North Star, her mother, Miss Laverne, her anchor. Each evening, no matter how late, Imani sat at the kitchen table with them, sharing quiet meals, helping with homework, letting the noise of the outside world melt away. One night, as they washed dishes, Brielle looked up. "Mama, why are some people so mad at you? You didn't do anything wrong." Imani knelt, cupping her daughter's face in her hands. "Baby, sometimes when you change things, it scares people. They're afraid because they don't understand, but that doesn't mean we stop." Brielle nodded, wiping away a tear. "I'm not scared if you're not." Imani kissed her forehead. "Then we're brave together." As the days wore on, allies appeared from surprising corners. A group of retired white judges, ashamed of their own silence, wrote an open letter of apology and support for Imani's reforms. Corporate CEOs pledged funding for the state's new anti-bias programs. Artists created murals of Imani and Brielle across city buildings. Even some police officers who'd once bristled at her rhetoric reached out. One, Sergeant Paul Dorsey, invited her to a precinct meeting. "Governor," he said, "I was raised to think justice belonged to people like me. I was wrong. I want to help you change it." Imani shook his hand, her voice steady. "That's how it starts." Late one night, after another wave of threatening calls, Imani sat on her front porch, staring out into the dark. The cicadas hummed and the city lights blinked in the distance. She was tired to the bone, but there was something else too, a flicker of hope she couldn't put out. Her phone vibrated. It was an email from a single father in Alabama. "My daughter saw your story on TV. She asked me if I'd ever been brave. I told her I'd try. Thank you, Governor. You're changing the world." Imani closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. She thought of all the little girls and boys watching, wondering if the world would ever make space for them. She thought of the women who had carried her, the ancestors whose names she bore. She was no longer just the governor. She was a movement. She stood, back straight, shoulders square. Tomorrow will be harder, but she was ready. At the National Governors Conference, Imani took the stage to a standing ovation. She wore her blue dress, the one she'd worn in Judge Price's courtroom. The room fell silent as she spoke. We all say justice is blind, but too often it's only deaf to those who need it most. I didn't come here to tell you my story. I came to remind you, if a governor can be mocked in open court, what happens to the ones no one sees? Our job is not just to uphold the law, but to heal it. Today, let's promise that no one, no matter their color, their income, or their past, will ever feel invisible in the halls of power again. Reporters scribbled furiously. Governors who had never spoken to her before reached out for handshakes, some even asking for her help drafting similar reforms in their own states. Back in her own city, as news of her speech played on TV, neighbors gathered on Imani's front lawn. Miss Laverne brought out sweet tea and pie. Kids played in the yard, their laughter ringing into the night. Imani looked around, heart swelling. She was exhausted, but for the first time since this all began, she felt not just the weight of the world, but its embrace. The first reforms hit the courts within 2 weeks. New reporting protocols, anonymous complaint hotlines, mandatory retraining sessions that drew groans and eye rolls from the old guard. Some judges retired quietly, others fought, denouncing the governor's overreach in televised town halls, but found little sympathy in the new climate. Local newspapers ran photos of Imani meeting with families at community centers, listening and taking notes. Each headline carried the same undertone: the system is changing and she won't back down. But in rural towns, protesters gathered. Pickup trucks circled courthouses, flags waving defiantly. Pundits on AM radio fanned the flames. "She's trying to make us ashamed of our own history," a man in faded overalls grumbled to his neighbor. "This is America, not some social experiment." At a diner on the outskirts of Jefferson, an older waitress handed out coffee with a frown. "The judge was one of us. Now look, she's got everyone scared to say a word." Yet even there, the tide wasn't entirely one way. A young black teacher, overhearing the complaints, spoke up at the counter. "He wasn't one of us. He just never saw us." The waitress pursed her lips, but didn't argue. The movement's reach crept closer to home. One afternoon, Brielle came home from school fighting tears. Imani hugged her daughter tightly. "What happened, baby?" Brielle's voice wobbled. "Some kids said you're making trouble, that their parents hate you. One girl said her dad got fired because of you." Imani knelt to meet her gaze, her own heart breaking. "Change is scary for people, Brielle. Sometimes they're angry because they're afraid." Brielle sniffled. "I told them you're helping people, that you only want things to be fair." Imani smoothed her daughter's hair. "That's all we can do, sweetheart. Stand up, tell the truth. Sometimes it takes a long time for people to see what's right." They sat together until Brielle's tears faded into quiet strength. At the next legislative session, a group of lawmakers attempted to pass a bill slashing the governor's powers, stripping her office of its influence over judicial appointments. The chamber was packed, tension vibrating like a live wire. Vanessa worked the phones, rallying allies. Ellison briefed Imani, his jaw tight. "They think they can scare you into silence," he said. "We need a counterattack." Imani nodded. "Let's go public, remind them why we're here." She stood at the podium that night, broadcast statewide. "My office will not be intimidated. We will not roll back protections for the most vulnerable among us. This isn't about me. This is about every child, every mother, every father who's ever stood alone in front of a judge and hoped for fairness. We will not go backward." Social media exploded in support. Activists staged sit-ins at the Capitol. Petitions poured in, over 100,000 signatures in 24 hours. The bill died on the floor, but victory came at a price. Security at the governor's mansion tightened. State troopers patrolled the neighborhood. Anonymous phone calls woke Imani in the night, voices muttering threats before hanging up. Once, someone slashed her tires in the driveway. Imani's mother, Miss Laverne, tried to soothe her nerves. "They did this to King, too, to Fannie Lou Hamer. The world doesn't change without a fight." Imani managed a weary smile. "I just want Brielle to be safe." "She will be, because you're making it safer for all of them." In New York, crowds gathered outside the United Nations, waving signs that read, "Justice for all, support Governor Brooks." A South African civil rights leader sent a handwritten letter. "Your struggle is our struggle. We are watching, and we are proud." International media called Imani America's new conscience. The BBC broadcast interviews with her supporters, footage of the rallies, and images of young girls in Sunday dresses waving flags. Meanwhile, in a quiet suburb, retired Judge Wallace Simmons, once Price's closest ally, sat watching the news, troubled. His own grandchildren had confronted him after school. "Grandpa, were you ever mean to someone because they looked different?" He couldn't meet their eyes. That night, he wrote an op-ed for the local paper. "We cannot serve justice if we cannot see those who seek it. I was wrong. We must do better. I stand with Governor Brooks." The letter went viral. Simmons became a regular on talk shows, defending Imani's vision. With each success, the pressure mounted. Imani began to wake in the middle of the night, doubts gnawing at her resolve. Was she putting her family at risk? Was real change even possible, or was she painting a target on her own back just to have the next administration wipe it all away? On those nights, she'd sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the city sleep. Sometimes she'd text Vanessa or call her mother just to hear a steady voice. But mostly, she reminded herself why she started. The memory of standing alone in Judge Price's courtroom, the sting of his words, the eyes of the people watching. Other states took notice. Governors in Illinois, California, and Georgia announced their own judicial reform plans. News networks sent crews to Imani's city, profiling her team, following her to town halls and protests. Every week, another viral clip captured her, listening to the people, answering a child's question, hugging an exhausted grandmother after a long meeting. At a community forum in a forgotten corner of the state, a single mother approached the microphone, voice trembling. "My name is Alicia. I never thought I'd see someone like me leading this state. Governor Brooks, you gave me hope. How do we keep it going?" Imani's response was simple but powerful. "We do it together. No one changes the world alone." The audience rose in a standing ovation. For the first time, the local news reported the forum had to turn people away at the door. In a desperate bid, a group of lawmakers tried to launch a recall petition. They accused Imani of inciting division and abusing her power. But the effort fizzled, overwhelmed by the groundswell of support from every corner of the state. Still, the fight took its toll. Imani's hair grayed a little faster, the circles under her eyes deepened, and some nights she barely slept at all. But the movement was no longer hers alone. New leaders were rising, young, fierce, ready to carry the torch. One evening, as she tucked Brielle into bed, her daughter whispered, "Will people always remember this?" Imani brushed a lock of hair from Brielle's cheek. "Maybe not all of it, baby, but they'll remember that we tried, that we stood up even when it was hard." Brielle hugged her tightly. "I'm glad you're my mama." Imani closed her eyes, letting the weight of the world settle. For tonight she was just a mother, her daughter's hero. Tomorrow she would be the people's governor again. By the end of summer, it felt as if the whole country balanced on a knife's edge. The reforms Imani championed were now law: anti-bias oversight, open records, whistleblower protections, and transparent judicial appointments. New faces took the bench. More women, more people of color, more public defenders turned judges, and the public saw it happen in real time. But real change creates real enemies. One Monday, Vanessa burst into Imani's office. Her phone lit up with a dozen missed calls. "Governor, we have a problem." Imani didn't flinch. "What now?" Vanessa handed over a printout. "It's an emergency petition. The opposition is taking you to federal court. They're claiming your reforms violate judicial independence. They want an injunction immediately." Imani's jaw set. She'd expected backlash, but not like this. Who's behind it? Same coalition, old money, old power, a few national political groups. They're pouring in outside money, hiring high-profile lawyers. They want this to be your Waterloo. Imani's lips curled in a cold, determined smile. Let them come. Cable news and talk radio frothed with outrage and support in equal measure. Legal experts debated the meaning of independence. Protesters marched on both sides, some waving signs that read, "Let judges judge," others with banners, "Justice for all, no going back." Late-night comedians riffed on the drama. "If only all our judges had to answer to the governor, maybe my speeding ticket would get dismissed," one joked, drawing laughs but stoking debate. Imani knew the stakes. If the injunction held, the movement could be frozen in place. Worse, it would signal to every future reformer that real change was impossible. Vanessa, Ellison, and Carter worked around the clock, prepping legal briefs, rallying national civil rights groups, lining up expert witnesses and testimony from ordinary citizens whose lives had changed for the better. Imani appeared on every major network, unwavering. "We're not gutting judicial independence, we're protecting it from bias, secrecy, and abuse. The people deserve to trust their courts again. That's all we're fighting for." As the court date neared, the threats against Imani grew darker. One evening, as she arrived home, her security detail intercepted a suspicious car circling the block. Another night, graffiti scrawled across her front gate read, "You'll pay for what you've done." Brielle grew quiet at school, sticking close to a handful of trusted friends. Miss Laverne upped her prayers and doubled her cinnamon rolls, insisting on lighting candles in every window. Imani tried to keep her family shielded from the worst, but the walls felt thinner with every passing day. On the eve of the federal hearing, Imani stood alone in her office, staring out across the Capitol lawn. The city shimmered under streetlights, quiet but full of expectations. She found herself thinking about Judge Price, how easily he'd dismissed her, how many others had suffered in silence before her. She thought about the cost, her privacy, her safety, even Brielle's innocence. She thought of the ancestors, her grandmother, who'd cleaned courthouse floors but never entered the judge's chambers, her father, who died believing justice would always be just out of reach. Was it worth it? Would the world ever change? Her phone buzzed. A text from Brielle. "You got this, Mama. I love you." Imani smiled, tears threatening but not falling. "That's all I need," she whispered. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse was a fortress. Satellite trucks lined the streets. National Guardsmen patrolled the sidewalks. Reporters packed the steps, their microphones ready. Imani arrived flanked by her legal team and allies. Vanessa, Ellison, Carter, local clergy, union leaders, civil rights icons, and ordinary citizens who'd been changed by her reforms. Inside, the federal courtroom was austere and intimidating. The opposing counsel, a silver-haired man flown in from New York, rose with the measured arrogance of someone used to winning. "Your Honor, these reforms are an overreach. They chill the independence of the judiciary, set a dangerous precedent, and threaten the very foundation of our system." Imani's team countered with facts, testimony, and a parade of voices. A single father whose custody case was finally heard with respect. A Latina nurse whose wage theft claim no longer vanished into silence. A white teacher who admitted, "I didn't trust the courts until I saw them change." Imani herself took the stand. The courtroom fell silent as she spoke. "I'm not here to rule the courts. I'm here to remind them who they serve. When the system forgets the people, it loses its soul. We're not tearing down justice, we're building it up so everyone can find their place within it." The judge, a black woman with piercing eyes, listened in silence. The deliberations stretched late into the night. Protesters gathered outside, singing, chanting, and praying. The air was electric with hope and fear. Finally, just before midnight, the judge returned. The courtroom packed. Cameras rolling live, America watching. She spoke clearly. "Judicial independence does not mean judicial impunity. The reforms enacted by Governor Brooks do not threaten our courts. They strengthen them, making us more worthy of the people's trust. The injunction is denied. The law stands." The room erupted. Imani's team embraced, tears flowing freely. Outside, the crowd's cheers could be heard for miles. Social media lit up, hashtags, memes, news alerts, celebrating not just a victory, but a transformation. Imani emerged from the courthouse into a sea of lights and hands. People pressed forward for a glimpse, for a touch, for a word of hope. She lifted Brielle into her arms, the child's face radiant with pride. Miss Laverne stood beside them, strong as ever. Imani faced the crowd, her voice unwavering. "This victory is not mine alone. It belongs to everyone who dared to believe justice was possible. We proved that one voice, one truth, can change everything." Fireworks crackled above the city. Across the country, parents held their children a little closer. Teachers rewrote lesson plans. Judges, old and new, looked in the mirror and wondered if they could live up to this moment. The cost had been high, but the rewards were undeniable. Imani Brooks was no longer just a governor. She was the face of a new era, and for the first time in generations, justice felt like something everyone could reach. Dawn broke over the state capitol, soft and golden. The courthouse, once a symbol of cold bureaucracy, now shimmered with banners of hope and handwritten signs left from last night's celebration. Thank you, Governor Brooks. Justice is home. Never going back. Imani rose early, her body weary, but her mind humming with new possibilities. She padded barefoot through the mansion, coffee mug in hand, pausing at each window to let the sun warm her face. Outside, the city stirred. Honking cars, newsstands restocking papers, kids riding bikes, business owners sweeping their sidewalks. Life moved forward, but something fundamental had shifted. By noon, legislative aides and state officials filled the Capitol building with urgent energy. Meetings ran back to back. Judges, many of them newly appointed, met with community leaders for the first time, eager to listen instead of dictate. Vanessa ran point on logistics, barely pausing for breath. We have requests for interviews from the BBC, Al Jazeera, NPR, and Telemundo. Everyone wants to know what's next, Imani. Imani shook her head with a gentle smile. Tell them this isn't about one person. Tell them it's about the people, their courage, their voices, their victories. Ellison delivered updates from every corner of the state. Complaint calls to the hotline dropped by half in the last week. Court dockets cleared faster than ever before as judges sought to prove their fairness. Law schools reported record enrollment among Black, Latino, and Indigenous students. In conference rooms and back offices, administrators rewrote policy, ending the old ways of hiding bias and burying complaints. For the first time, every citizen had the right to a public hearing, and oversight committees rotated judges every 2 years to prevent old alliances from festering. At a downtown rec center, Brielle and her friends passed out "Justice Starts Here" buttons for a class project. In grocery store aisles and church parking lots, people greeted Imani with warmth and gratitude, not just as their governor, but as a neighbor. Old wounds began to heal. One afternoon, an elderly white man stopped Imani outside a barber shop, his cap in his hands. "Ma'am, I opposed you. I was wrong. My grandson's teacher told him he could be a judge one day. No one ever told me that when I was a boy." "Thank you." Imani squeezed his hand, her eyes bright. "We all learn. That's how we move forward." In the sanctuary of her kitchen, Imani stirred a pot of gumbo as Miss Laverne chopped onions and Brielle practiced spelling words at the table. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting the room in honeyed light. Miss Laverne hummed a hymn, her hands never pausing. "You did good, baby. What you did made the ancestors proud." Imani let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "I just wanted Brielle to live in a world where people like us don't have to fight for every scrap of dignity." Brielle piped up, "I want to be a lawyer, Mama." "Or a judge, or maybe the governor, like you." Miss Laverne winked. "You can be all three, child." They laughed, the sound easy and free. Later that night, as the city lights twinkled outside, Imani stood at Brielle's doorway and watched her sleep. In that stillness, she felt the generations behind her, women and men whose names she carried, whose struggles had carved her path. She whispered a quiet prayer of thanks and promise. "I will keep fighting for all of us." The changes spread like wildfire. Other governors, both blue states and red, called to ask for advice. New federal grants incentivized judicial transparency. The president invited Imani to chair a task force on national court reform. Even the entertainment world responded. A major studio announced a miniseries inspired by Imani's journey. Best-selling authors lined up to interview her. She turned down lucrative offers to tell all, choosing instead to spend her time in town halls, schools, and churches, listening as much as speaking. Vanessa teased her one evening as they prepped for another rally. "You could run for anything right now. Senator, president, the world's watching." Imani shook her head. "Let's fix the home first. The rest can wait." Within a year, data told the story. Dismissal rates for claims of discrimination dropped 60%. Black and Latino children received fairer discipline in public schools. Courtrooms became safe spaces for families who had once feared to enter. Whistleblowers stepped forward with confidence, knowing the governor's office would protect them. Judges who clung to the old ways found themselves outnumbered and outvoted. Some left, others changed. Journalists dubbed it the Brooks Doctrine. Law schools taught courses on it. Politicians copied its language in speeches. But for Imani, the greatest reward was quieter. Letters from young people, the tearful hugs of elders, the laughter of children playing on courthouse lawns, once guarded by suspicion. At the first anniversary of her fateful day in Judge Price's court, Imani stood on the steps of the same courthouse, this time as an honored guest. The crowd stretched for blocks, including families, teachers, nurses, construction workers, students, and faith leaders. She stepped to the microphone, the sun warming her shoulders, and spoke in the voice that had changed everything. We are not finished. Justice is not a destination. It's a journey, a fight, a hope, a promise we make to each other every single day. I didn't start this alone, and I won't finish it alone. This is your victory. This is our home. The cheers rolled down the street, a river of hope and gratitude. Imani looked out over the crowd, faces of every color and age, and knew her work would never truly be finished, but it would endure. Because justice, once awakened, is hard to silence. Night falls gently over the city, and the lights of the Capitol glow like a promise. For the first time in months, Imani sits alone on her porch, the world quiet except for the chirp of crickets and the soft breeze rustling through the magnolia trees. She sips her tea, gaze fixed on the stars, those distant points of hope out of reach for so many, until someone dares to climb. Inside, Brielle sleeps soundly, dreaming of the future. Miss Laverne hums her old hymns, peace radiating from every line on her face. Somewhere across town, a new judge, once an outsider herself, signs her first court order, her hand steady, her heart sure. The courthouse where this all began stands changed, inside and out. There are new faces behind the bench, new rules on the walls, and new expectations in every hearing. The echoes of old injustices linger, but so does the laughter of children playing on the lawn. The prayers of families who finally believe justice will listen. Imani knows the world is still imperfect. There will always be another battle, another voice that needs lifting, another gatekeeper who stands in the way. But tonight there is victory. Tonight there is proof that one act of courage can start a chain reaction that shakes even the oldest, coldest halls of power. And she thinks of every woman who ever sat alone in a waiting room praying for a chance. Every father who left the courtroom feeling invisible. Every child was told to sit down, be quiet, not to dream too big. She thinks of the names the world forgets, and the names it will never forget now. Imani closes her eyes, breathes deep, and makes a silent vow. I will keep fighting. I will keep believing. I will never let them make us invisible again. The story of Governor Imani Brooks is not just her own. It's the story of anyone who's ever been doubted, dismissed, or overlooked. It's a reminder that justice isn't a given. It's something we build day by day, voice by voice, action by action. So now it's your turn. What would you do if no one believed you belonged? What would you risk for justice? Would you stand up, even if you stood alone? Let us know in the comments below. Share your own stories, because the next chapter of justice could start with you. If this story moved you, if you believe in a world where one person can make a difference, hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful true stories, and share this video with someone who needs hope tonight. Remember, the halls of power only change when we demand it. Don't wait for permission. Start something. This is more than just a story. It's a call. Justice isn't finished. Neither are you.